Welcome to IPDay's Wednesday webinar. Today we are going to be talking about maximizing your partnership with vocational rehabilitation, aka VR. My name is Kate Redman. I'm an IPDAY subject matter expert. I'm the founder and CEO of Light and Salt Learning, but also I am a tutor who works with adults with disabilities through vocational rehabilitation. And I've actually been doing that longer than I've been in the world of adult education. I came into adult education sideways. As I was working with a tutor, I would get assigned students who were preparing for their GED and who were co-enrolled in GED classes. And I actually even learned that adult education was a thing through my work with vocational rehabilitation. Today, some things to remember. You are all muted. You're in listen only mode, which means if you want to communicate with me, best way is actually through the chat. Use the chat for me, okay? Today's presentation is being recorded. It's going to be archived and available on the IPDAY website within 20 or within 48 hours. You're going to have it up there in 2 days. Currently, you already have the handbook for today and the slides for today up there, and that's going to be important because I'm going to give you some contact information and there's some clickable links and such that are in the presentation. So if you want to be able to use that today, then hit up the IPDAY website for the PowerPoint. All right, so let's start thinking, first of all, about a student. So I'm going to give you an example of a student that I worked with in vocational rehabilitation in my duties there first. So I had a student, we'll call her Rebecca, who had a diagnosis of mental retardation because of a low IQ. And she knew that she wanted to be in the medical field, but she wasn't sure in what capacity that she could go. And so she needed some help setting goals, employment goals, exploring what various routes there were to entry level positions within the medical field. Then, once she chose her pathway, which was she wanted to be a radiology tech or sonography tech, sorry, she was taking classes, but you can imagine due to the nature of her disabilities, she had some issues there in that she couldn't take her classes as fast as one would be required to do for FAFSA. You have to take a certain number of classes at a time in order to qualify for FAFSA, and she couldn't. So she needed help, Voc Rehab's help with tuition. And then after that, when she was moving into the job field after she had finished her course of studies, again, with the nature of her disabilities, she tended to be a slower learner. And so she needed some employment services surrounding her to help her with her on the job training and get some one-on-one help as she did that. So that's Rebecca. Now it's your turn. I want you to think of a student with a disability. So it could be a physical, mental, or cognitive. Doesn't require a formal diagnosis. You could just suspect that the student has a disability. And in the chat, I'd like you to tell us a barrier that the student faces in each one of the following categories. So, one, setting educational and employment goals, like Rebecca, who needed some exploration into entry-level medical positions. Maybe they have a barrier with achieving a certain educational goal. And then what is their barrier to achieving an employment goal? So go ahead, do that for me. Drop it in the chat. I'm going to take a look here. So anxiety, low confidence, fear of technology, frustration, or shutting down quickly. Thank you, Harold. Interpersonal skills are a big one. I'll give you a minute to think. Oh, we're going to talk about that, Anna. Self-advocacy skills are huge. Yes. Guidance with, guidance with following complicated directions is super important when you're working with any kind of a government agency. That's an interesting thing when working with VR. Sometimes people need a little support there. All right. I'll give time for another one, maybe. I'm. Anybody have any what they had? There we go. Barriers, low confidence and anxiety make it hard for students to set goals or take the first step towards school and employment. Lovely. Yeah, if you don't even believe that you can do certain things, it sure does limit your goal setting for sure. Nice. Thank you, you guys. I appreciate you. All right, so agenda today, we are going to look at WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and the partner organizations that it creates. We'll look specifically at vocational rehabilitation, talk about how we can maximize our partnership with Voc Rehab, and then finally we'll reflect and commit. So let's start with WIOA, a partnership of common goals. So what is WIOA? It is federal legislation that was signed into law into 2014. That's whole goal is to develop the nation's workforce system. So it supports people, including youth and adults, who have some kind of barrier to employment, trying to get them to access to meaningful career pathways. And of course, it helps employers then be able to recruit and retain a skilled workforce. So I know that we hear quite frequently that there is a shortage of skilled labor. The goal of WIOA is to fill that gap between people who want employment and employers who would like to employ people. The WIOA is meant to ensure that all job seekers or job seekers can have access to, of course, employment, but also the education necessary for employment, any kind of job training needed, support services. This is so broad. We'll look at some of the specific instances of this, but the goal there is that they can achieve labor market success, a living wage, you guys, and again, have that pool of skilled labor. So we always sets up some partners in order to accomplish that job. We have a network of partner organizations with a common goal of empowering job seekers. The first is Title I, which includes adult dislocated workers and youth services. An example you may have heard of in that category is Job Corps. We have us, yay, Title II. We're adult education and family literacy. And we do the academic side of it, although there's lots of workforce involved in what we do as well, of course. Employment services, including all those one-stops, are our Title III. And then finally, Title IV is vocational rehabilitation, which provides employment services to people with disabilities. So let's look a little more in depth at vocational rehabilitation. So vocational rehabilitation, or VR, these are state-run organizations. So it's federal legislation, yes, but they're run at the state level and they provide services to youth and adults with disabilities. There's some subcategories. So there's vocational rehabilitation itself, just the general one. There's also supported employment services. And according to the federal legislation, they need to be able to help with independent living services for people who are 55 years old or older with severe vision impairment. All of this is federally funded and overseen by the federal organization RSA, Rehabilitation Services Administration. And like adult education nowadays, it falls under the authority of the U.S. Department of Labor. So here's part of the contact information that I'm giving you guys. If you are in Florida, VR services are provided by two separate agencies. So we have the agency that does the general, just Voc Rehab, any kind of a disability, and then we have the Florida Blind specific Division of Blind Services. I've got phone and website for you. Again, I mean, I suppose you can jot this down, but this is going to be available in that PowerPoint for you. And this is who your first line of defense, your contacts within the state of Florida. All right, so what kind of services does Voc Rehab provide? They have, let me get out my notes, career services. So one of the things that they'll do is career counseling and guidance. So like my student Rebecca, who wasn't sure what entry-level position she wanted, they can help with that. And then job placement, job keeping skills, and job search assistance is also important. So I know we try to do a lot of this stuff in our classrooms already. A lot of you guys are doing kind of career guidance kind of things with students. You'll give inventories or look at ONETs. And in the world of adult education, we're also responsible for employment outcomes, right? They look at our students. So after a period of time after leaving the programs and where they at employment wise, and it's a lot for us, and sometimes we feel like it's kind of out of our hands. So to have this piece of support for at least our students with disabilities is super useful. They provide training. So here's a really important one, diagnostics and evaluation. VR does their own evaluation of students, which means if you have those adult students who maybe you suspect have a disability, but they've never gotten a diagnosis, when someone applies for VR services, they do an evaluation on them, and that can include diagnostic services. And so that is huge, especially I know it's been an issue in my classroom. It's been an issue with my students that maybe they need accommodations, and I'm not able to help them to get those because they've never been formally diagnosed. So this is something that VR can help with. Training and tuition is a big one. Um, we, uh, I had a student, for example, who was doing a phlebotomy program, and none of her local community colleges did the phlebotomy. So she needed to go to a private tech school, and it wasn't covered by FAFSA because of the length of the program, and VR was able to help with her tuition. Occupational expenses. Um, so this could be uniforms, it could be even transportation to work, support, interpreter services, rehabilitation technology. So we had a student who needed a communication device that they could help with that. Transportation to services. As a tutor, I'm able to pick up my students from their homes and bring them to a public place like a library or school or somewhere else to work on tutoring. And I know transportation to our classes can be a big issue as well. There's lots more than this, guys. This is just a handful of the services that they provide. So you can go ahead and, like I said, access the PowerPoint on the IPDAY website and click on that link for a full list. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second because it looks like I have a bunch of questions. Ah, thank you. Joe already took care of it. Sweet. All right. So, of course, these are all lovely services, and we wish that all of our students could get them, but there are some requirements to qualify for VR services. So, what guidelines do they have to meet? Well, they have to meet all of the following requirements. One, obviously, we have to have some kind of a physical or mental impairments, some kind of a disability. that that disability has got to be such that it actually challenges them, makes finding employment that can sustain them a challenge. And so there has to be some kind of barrier to employment there. They must need some kind of level of support in order to either prepare for a job, get a job, keep a job, or maybe they've lost work and they need to go get a new job. And they need to be able to it needs to link what they need to a employment outcome. So it's not just general, oh, they need a better job and so we can do all these different things. They're going to get a specific employment outcome or multiple specific outcomes that it has to that we have to be able to link their services to. So you can refer students that you suspect might benefit from services. What kind of students should you refer? Well, of course, if they have a diagnosed or suspected disability. Now, it's especially important if they seem to have some co-occurring conditions or comorbidities. They're more likely to be able to qualify for voc rehab services sooner rather than later if they have multiple disabilities going on. Of course, if they're enrolled in our adult education programs and they're having kind of some kind of struggle there, if they're unemployed, underemployed, or earning below a living wage, so how many of our students don't fall in this category? That's pretty much all of them, huh? They need to transition to a new career pathway due to injury, disability, or health-related changes. And I guess I shouldn't limit it to this because I've had ones that it was for another reason. I had a gentleman who was a bus driver who retired, but his retirement wasn't enough. So he needed supplementary income and he needed a GED in order to get that. And he had some cognitive developmental challenges that he'd been facing his whole life that didn't become an issue as a bus driver, but he was then struggling to get work. Or I've had, oh, yes, a woman who was actually an executive who was laid off when her company changed hands. And then all of a sudden, she went from being an executive to not being able to find employment because she didn't have a GED. And she came into the classroom and clearly had some kind of undiagnosed learning disability that had never been dealt with because algebra was just such a challenge. All the symbols were. So those are some examples then of some non-disability related career changes. But yes, they should be experiencing some kind of barriers to employment. So that can include challenges within the adult education classroom. So talked about those two students, but it's not only learning difficulties or learning disabilities that might be their challenge. A huge one that VR, it falls into the purview of VR is executive function challenges. So if you have any students who have trouble, if you have any students, this is great, with executive function. So they have trouble with starting a task, staying on task, focus, those kind of metacognition skills of what it takes to achieve their goals, then they might have some kind of a disability that affects that. So there's a lot of them. There's ADHD is the one that usually comes up for people, but this is also an issue for people with anxiety, with bipolar, PTSD, traumatic brain injury. And so, yeah, VR can help with executive function issues as well. All right, so how do we apply for VR services? The processes actually can vary by state because VR is state organizations. Each state can be a little different, but in this, so check with your local state. But in Florida, it starts with actually a referral. So there's a referral form that you can either fill out or the student themselves can fill out, and then they mail it. I know, snail mail, right? To their local VR office. And from there, they're going to get contacted by a vocational rehabilitation employee and they'll get invited to an orientation. And that orientation, it could be a group orientation or one-on-one, but they'll learn more about the program, more about the qualifications, and then they'll decide at that time whether they want to do the formal application. Okay. So once they apply for services, then there's an eligibility decision. Now, when they do the eligibility decision, there's actually three categories that they can fall in. Let me go grab their technical names. So they fall into either category one, most significant disability, category two, significant disability, or category three, they just have a disability. And so the most significant ones obviously are the ones that they treat first. So if there's an issue with funding or staffing, they're going to treat that first group, or I shouldn't say treat, they're going to serve that first group first primarily, and other groups could end up on a waiting list. And so this is one of the reasons that I say look for students who might have a comorbidity. Or if you have a student who's applying to Voc Rehab, it's important to help them to know to share every issue that they might be having because maybe they're only thinking about, oh, I have this learning disability, or we're only thinking about, oh, I have this learning disability. But maybe they have more than that going on. Like we said, maybe there's anxiety or depression or PTSD or some kind of a physical impairment. And if we can show that they have those, they can show that they have those comorbidities, then they're more likely to fall into that first category and get services right away. All right, once eligibility has been confirmed and they're off the wait list and they're ready to work, the client and the caseworker write an individualized employment plan, which they actually call the IPE. So don't mix it up with an IEP like in elementary school, but an individualized plan of employment, an IPE. And then the client gets those necessary services to meet employment goals. And this is where like my organization comes into play. So I'm a contractor who works through Voc Rehab, not a counselor, and my company provides all kinds of services. I do mostly exclusively tutoring, but the company itself provides lots of other services. So what'll happen is a representative from my company will go in to meet with the client and the counselor, and they will sit down and discuss all the client's needs and all the different services and service providers they need to meet those needs. And each one will be linked directly to a goal within that plan. And we're really laser focused. We can only provide services that directly relate to those goals. And so those meetings are really, really important. And then the case is closed after the client meets employment goals. Now, this is generally 90 days after employment. So some people are in voc rehab for years, depending on how much training that they need. But 90 days after employment is generally when they try to close the case, but not always, because they also provide services to keep people employed. Sometimes if people need an extra level of support, it might go beyond 90 days of employment in their career goal there. Okay. Oh, you guys, I'm flying through. Okay. So now let's talk maximizing the partnership, strengthening our tie with VR. So I would encourage you guys to build relationships really intentionally and get to know each other. It has been my experience, even though I work in both sides of it, that there's not a lot of communication. VR doesn't always know what adult education does, and adult education often does not know what VR does. And except in the barest ways, we're often not really working together. And so, first step, get to know each other. So, encourage you to just reach out, first of all, to your local office with a soft contact through phone or email. You just introduce yourself, introduce what you do. And then I would encourage you to follow up with a visit. We get a lot of calls, we get a lot of emails. You guys have that same issue. We're inundated, but there's just something about that face to face that can't be beat. So make nice, bring your cookies, okay, and get in and make sure you know the people and the counselors in your local office. Provide them with any flyers that you have, class schedules, cards. If you have some kind of a fair coming up or IET, they should know about all the services that your program offers, and you should be getting the similar materials from them. And instructors and counselors can kind of partner. So, or service providers like myself, it doesn't have to be the VR counselor, it can be the service provider. I'll give you some examples. When I was down in the valley, or I should say, well, anyway, at one point many years ago, I got sent to work with a student who was going to school for CNA, and they literally sent me into the classroom with her because she had such issues with note taking and with verbal directions. And so I got to go into classes with her and work one-on-one. Well, I had to have a working relationship with all the staff in order to do that. And then as an adult educator in my classroom, I had a tutor who would come in and do a similar thing with her client that she was working with, so that after she would help her take notes, and then after when we would break to do independent work, she would be able to kind of be working with her one-on-one and help her to ask good questions. And so you can partner together in many ways, not necessarily that closely, but okay. And now referrals should definitely be a two-way street. Like we've been talking all this time about referring our clients out to them, but all of their clients just about need at least one of our services in the world of adult education. So that's why it's another reason it's really important to build up these partnerships, because we want to see their clients coming our way for our services. So of course, GED HSE is a huge one. It is the initial step in how many different career paths, and it is the start of a lot of VR clients' career pathways. Employability skills are a huge one. So I had an example for that one. Oh, Yeah, so we're supposed to teach soft skills, and that can really benefit our VR partners. They all their students need or all their clients need that. Oh, literacy. It's it I want to stop and slow down on this one because it's so important to me. I might even tear up just thinking about it. But I've had various clients over the years referred to me from VR with specific employment goals who actually were illiterate and could not read as adults. So I think of one, um, she was going to with the goal of becoming a cosmetologist. And here she was, she couldn't read. So, how are you supposed to be a cosmetologist if you can't read the back of the labels on different chemical products, if you can't read the manufacturer safety data sheet to stay safe? Like, that's dangerous. Or I had another one who was unable to read, who was going to school to be a CNA. Same thing. We have to chart, we have to read charts as a CNA. And as a voc rehab tutor, because reading was not directly connected in their service plans to their employment goal, I was not able to teach them reading. And so here you have an adult who desperately wants to read, they need to read, and I couldn't teach it. And so I wish at the time, this is way back when I first started with voc rehab, I would have known about adult education because that would have been a perfect handoff there. So workplace academics are another one. For example, I had a student who was going to uh, had an employment goal of becoming a cashier, and she could not count money, and so she needed some serious work in decimals, all the basic operations of decimals, place value, counting by fives, tens, and 25s. Many things that she could get out of an adult education classroom were part of her individualized plan for employment. Job training, of course. Again, I think of that client that was going to that private CNA school who they had to pay tuition for. Well, how many of us have IETs now that do similar entry level medical? And so the more that VR, or I should say, the less that VR has to pay per client, the more clients that they can serve. So as much as possible, if we're able to help with our IET programs and job training, that's a huge help to them. English for the workplace, of course, is a huge one. And again, it's one that a service provider for VR cannot provide. We're not allowed to direct teach um, English skills just for the sake of English skills. They have to be more closely related to the job. And then financial literacy is a big one. Oh, my students, some of them will break your heart. I know you guys are used to that, but I had a woman that I worked with who she would cash her checks at a cash checking place and she was unable to count money, so she wasn't sure if she was getting ripped off. And when she did finally learn to count money, she did realize that the employees at the check cashing place were skimming off of her check. They had figured out that she couldn't count money. So financial literacy is a big one. Also, just getting a checking account, managing one, were skills that she could have used. And then technology skills. I have a student right now that I'm working with through Voc Rehab who I'm supposed to be working with him on medical laboratory technologist certification test. And we spend so much of our time working on tech skills because he doesn't know how to find an old email to attach things or find an attachment, download things, where to find things once he downloads them, use his online course, use the online software we use for review. All of those things are weaknesses that he could certainly use further assistance with. Now, it's important that we do a warm handoff. You just give a student a business card or a flyer, you're often not likely to see them follow up. All right. So I think it's important that we all, as adult educators, know the process of applying for voc rehab services well enough to be able to walk students through that process, that referral and application profit process. We can certainly complete referrals or aid the student in completing the referral. So invite them. Yeah, come to my office after class. Let's go ahead and start that process together. They're much more likely to see them follow through. Have VR out to your classrooms. Do you have guest speakers out to your classroom? Have them out that they know what's going on, or maybe you do resource fairs at your program where they can have a booth. Definitely support students as they seek more information about the program. It is important as a student goes to navigate any government system that they are self-advocates. We have Voc Rehab is great and I love them, but like many of our government programs, they tend to be a little stressed, overstressed. They tend to have large caseloads, and maybe not every client gets quite as much support as you'd hope. So I think teaching our students to advocate for themselves and helping them learn to advocate for themselves is really useful. I think a lot of students, there's various reasons why they don't right now have that skill set. One is just a lot of them think it's their own, everything is their own fault. Like it's their own fault. They can't do certain tasks, whether it's just staying focused. Maybe they think they're lazy or they think they're stupid. So that kind of impetus of it's my fault, it's my problem is an issue, but also some of them have never advocated for themselves. We get these, especially if they've are younger or they never got diagnosed when they should have been diagnosed. They're used to either no one advocating for them or a parent or a teacher maybe doing it. And so they need some support learning to advocate for themselves so we can help them with that. And another part of advocating for them or helping them advocate, a lot of our students need accommodations, like in testing or in the workplace. They're going to need accommodations when they go to college. They don't know what accommodations are available. They don't know what's out there. If you don't even have a, what's the word I'm looking for? Concept, you don't even have a concept of what's out there. You don't know what to ask for. And so I think that just, that's a good thing for us to know and for us to help them with. All right. And in the end, I think it's really important that we all operate as a team. In order to operate as a team, we've got to communicate with each other. So know the academic goals and the client service plan, as long as your student, of course, is willing to share it with you. Communicate with the student and the counselor about the progress towards those goals. So, for example, if they're working on something in your class and they get stuck, letting the counselor know is a big deal. Give you an example. Maybe you have a student who's really struggling to take notes in your class and you know that they could benefit from some note-taking software like a smart pen. Well, reaching out to the counselor and saying that the counselors are able to provide a lot of those things. I've seen them pay for GED tests, calculators, smart pens, communication devices, laptops, desks, transportation. There's a lot of things that hold our students back that we can be reaching out and seeing maybe that VR can fill in that gap so it doesn't become such an issue in our classroom. And final thing though is make sure that you have any necessary release forms on file. So this is going to vary based on your organization, but at my organization, for example, because of FERPA legislation, which we're all subject to, we had to have release forms that a student had to sign in order for me be able to communicate and make sure that you have all the VR people on there, whether it's the service providers like the tutors or the counselors. Anybody you need to talk to should be on there if that's what your program requires. All right, you guys. Wow. Okay, so key takeaways from today. We're wrapping it up a little early, but make many students experience barriers to employment. We're not alone in equipping our students, right? WIOA has created this framework of partner organizations that we can work within. And one of those, Title IV, Vocational Rehabilitation, exists to give all those employability services to job seekers with disabilities. Referrals should be a two-way street. We should be referring students, but they should also be referring clients to us. And a strong relationship between us, Title II, and Title IV equals better outcomes for us and our students. Yay. Okay, let me check the chat for any questions. Okay, we don't have any. So, I have a question for you now, though. In chat, let me know what step will you take this month to improve student outcomes by partnering more effectively with VR? Would you go ahead and drop that in the chat? And if you have any questions about what we talked about, drop that in the chat as well. Would an appropriate service of VR to provide testing to determine if the referral actually has items which would allow the client to gain accommodations on the GED? The client, yes, absolutely. So when VR does their evaluation, if the client doesn't already have diagnoses and paperwork, one of the things that they can do is evaluations and diagnoses. And then VR can provide the paperwork that they need in order to apply for accommodations on the GED. All right. Um, so I have a few students that truly do qualify. Yes, refer them next week. We are working with some partners to open a dialogue between VR and the Florida Department of Corrections. That's wonderful to serve our returning citizens. Great. I'm wondering who your partners are. I think everybody would love to hear about that. Identify one student who may benefit from, oh, you're going to identify a student who could benefit from VR support and contact the counselor. Beautiful. And the client was told they were not job ready and therefore they couldn't serve them. Ooh, that's interesting, Sandra. I've not heard of that before. Um, do you happen to know what feedback they gave to say they weren't job ready? Or was it just this general thing? Ah, that should not have happened. That's very weird. Usually the GED is the first step on that and they can help with that. Interesting. I don't even know where to go from that. I don't know if there's an appeal process or what. Yeah. Okay. I want to be able to have a more collaborative relationship with my student's VR counselor. For example, be able to see the IPE and if it matches or needs to be updated based on my conversations with the students. Is there a specific form we need to use? That is something to check with your organization about. We had a FERPA release form that my organization used because I was part of a college and it was a college form. So I think that that's the first place to check. Sandra, they gave you to a district person who never responded. I would say walk in person. It's hard not to respond in person. And also, we always CC the supervisor. But if that's as high up as you go, they have really high turnover. It's kind of like in the world of, sorry, I'm also a foster parent. It's kind of like in the world of Department of Child Safety. There's can be some high turnover there and counselor movement a lot. So I think reaching back out again would be useful and maybe CCing a few people might be useful as well. All right. Beautiful. All right. Well, if you guys don't have any other questions or any other feedback, I'd love to hear your feedback about how the presentation went today. So we're going to put a little poll up here. And if you could fill it out, I would really appreciate it. And then while you're doing that, I'll tell you about our next webinar. So the next Wednesday webinar is Wednesday, May 13th. That's next week at 3 p.m. Eastern. It's from practice to diploma, building an effective GED voucher and testing framework. And you can sign up on the IPDAY website. And again, you can also get this PowerPoint with all the links and the contact information on the IPDAY website. All right, you guys, super appreciate you. Thank you for participating. And you are welcome, Anna. Everybody is so welcome.